I never thought I'd spend my final years sleeping on a cot in a storage room, listening to my son-in-law laugh at me through the wall. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as a machinist at a tool manufacturing plant outside of Columbus, Ohio. I didn't get rich. I didn't get famous. But I showed up every single morning, clocked in, and came home smelling like grease and metal shavings. And I did it for my family, for my daughter, Renee, for my son, Marcus, for my wife, Carol. God rest her soul. Carol passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. She was gone in 11 weeks from diagnosis. After that, everything I thought I understood about my life stopped making sense. I kept the house for 2 years after she died. Our house in Maplewood, a 3-bedroom ranch we'd bought in 1989 for $83,000 and paid off by the time Renee started high school. I mowed the lawn. I fixed the gutters. I made coffee in the mornings and sat at the kitchen table where Carol used to sit across from me. And I talked to her like she was still there. My neighbor Dorothy thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. The loneliness wasn't something I could explain to people who hadn't lived it. It wasn't just missing her. It was the silence of a house that used to be full. So when Renee called me in the spring and said, "Dad, why don't you sell the house and come stay with us for a while?" I thought maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Maybe this is the next chapter. I should have asked more questions before I said yes. Renee had married Derek Solis 3 years earlier. I was at the wedding. I smiled in the photos. I danced with my daughter. I told myself I liked Derek because Renee loved him. And that was enough. But the truth was, something about Derek always sat wrong with me, the way he spoke over people at dinner. The way he corrected Renee in public, like she was a student who'd gotten an answer wrong. The way he looked at me with that half smile that never reached his eyes. Their house was a new build in Fairview Heights, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. An open floor plan with quartz countertops and pendant lights that cost more than my first car. Derek was in commercial real estate. He made good money and made sure everyone knew it. I sold the Maplewood house for $214,000. After settling some of Carol's remaining medical bills and setting aside money for emergencies, I had a solid amount in savings plus my pension, $1,200 a month. Every month. Reliable as sunrise. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't helpless. I moved into Renee and Derek's guest room in late April. The first week was fine. Renee cooked dinner and we watched old movies on the couch, and she laughed at my jokes the way she did when she was 12. I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I wasn't completely invisible. The second week, Derek started making comments. Nothing direct at first. Little things. Walter, are you going to be home all day again? Said with a tight smile. Like my presence in the house was a scheduling inconvenience. Or at dinner, Renee made this for the 2 of us. But I guess the more the merrier. Or when I offered to help with yard work, don't worry about it. I've got a guy for that. I told myself I was being sensitive. This was his house. He had his routines. I was the disruption. But by the 3rd week, the comments weren't so subtle. It started with the money. Derek had apparently decided without asking me. Without consulting Renee in any way I was aware of that my being in the house meant I should be contributing financially. Not as a guest. As a tenant. You've got a pension. Right? He said one evening when Renee had stepped out to pick up something from the pharmacy. We were in the kitchen. He was pouring himself a drink. He didn't offer me one. I do. I said, $1,200 a month. I blinked. I hadn't told him that number. Renee must have mentioned it. Around that? Yes. That's not nothing. He set his glass down and leaned against the counter. I've been thinking. Since you're staying here indefinitely, it makes sense for you to chip in. rent, groceries, utilities. You're using the space. I didn't respond right away. I was calculating not money, but something harder to measure. How much were you thinking? I said. 700 a month seems fair. 700 out of 1,200, leaving me $500 a month for everything else: my phone, my medications, my car insurance, any small dignity I might want to maintain. I'll think about it. I said. Don't think too long, he said, and he took his drink into the living room. I told Renee that night. She looked uncomfortable in a way. I recognized the look of someone who already knew and had been hoping not to have to talk about it. He mentioned it to me, she said carefully. I told him it was too much. What did he say? She didn't answer. She started doing dishes. I paid $500 a month. Derek accepted it without saying thank you. Renee looked relieved that we'd found a compromise. I tried to be grateful for the roof over my head and told myself this was temporary. I'd figure out something else. I'd find an apartment, a senior community, something. I just needed a little time. But time has a way of getting away from you when you're grief-stricken and tired and 68 years old, and the world doesn't make much room for men like that. Summer came and things got worse. Derek's sister and her husband came to visit for 2 weeks in July. And Derek told me not asked. Told that I'd need to clear out of the guest room. Where do you suggest I go? I said. We've got the storage room off the garage. I cleared out some space. It's not huge, but there's a cot. You'll manage. The storage room was 12 feet by 9 feet. It had a single window that looked out at the side of the garage wall. There was no air conditioning. In July in Ohio. That room reached 91 degrees by 2 in the afternoon. I had a box fan that moved hot air from one side of the room to the other. I slept on a camping cot with a foam pad I'd found folded in the corner. I told myself 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. Derek's sister and her husband stayed for 3 weeks. And then, because the guest room was freshly set up and more comfortable for guests, Derek suggested I just stay in the storage room. It makes more sense for everyone, he said. I looked at Renee. She was looking at the floor. I moved my things out of the storage bins and into a corner. I bought a small lamp from the hardware store. I tried to make it bearable. It wasn't bearable. Some mornings I woke up so stiff I could barely stand. My knee, the one I'd had replaced 6 years ago, throbbed in the cold on the nights when the temperature dropped. I started eating less because going into the main house for meals meant walking through Derek's territory and absorbing whatever comment he'd decided to make that day. Walter's gracing us with his presence, he'd say, when I appeared in the kitchen, or don't let him near the good dishes. Renee. He broke a mug last week. I had broken a mug. I'd knocked it off the counter, reaching past it. It was an accident. Derek spoke about it as though I were a child who needed supervision. One Saturday afternoon in August, Derek had 2 of his friends over for a barbecue in the backyard. I'd stepped out of the garage to get some air, and Derek spotted me from across the patio. Hey, guys, that's my father-in-law, he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Been living in our storage room for 2 months. Like a stray we can't get rid of. His friends laughed. One of them looked at me with something between amusement and pity. I stood there for a moment, just a moment, and then I went back inside. I sat on the cot in that 12 by 9 room, and I put my face in my hands, and I let myself feel it. The humiliation. The grief, not just for Carol, but for the version of myself that used to matter. The man who built a life and raised 2 children and paid off a house and thought that at the end of it, he'd earned some kind of rest. I thought about Marcus. My son Marcus is 41 years old. He works as a structural engineer. Lives in Portland, Oregon. He's a good man, always has been. Steady, thoughtful, the kind of person who calls when he says he'll call and shows up when he says he'll show up. He'd been on a 7-month infrastructure project in Chile. Limited communication. Long hours. The kind of work that swallows a person whole. We'd spoken briefly in May, right after I moved in. I told him things were fine. I didn't want to worry him. I didn't want to be the father who called his son 8,000 miles away to complain about his living situation. Marcus was supposed to be back in late September, but the project wrapped 3 weeks early. He didn't call ahead. He drove straight from the airport to Fairview Heights on a Wednesday morning. A rental car full of his luggage and some gifts he'd picked up in Santiago. He pulled into the driveway at 9:47 inches the morning. I know the time because I heard the car. And I checked the little clock I kept on the shelf above the cot. I heard the doorbell. Heard Renee's voice. Surprised and happy. Heard her call out Marcus's name. Then silence. Then footsteps. Moving through the house. Moving toward the garage. The door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway of the storage room, still wearing his jacket from the flight. His carry-on bag still over his shoulder. He looked at the cot. He looked at the box fan. He looked at the single lamp. He looked at the stack of my clothes, folded in the corner because there was no dresser. He looked at the foam pad on the cot and the old quilt I'd brought from Maplewood because no one had offered me new bedding. Then he looked at me. I watched something move across my son's face that I hadn't seen since Carol died. A kind of controlled devastation. The look of a person who is deciding, very carefully, how to hold themselves together. "Dad," he said. His voice was low and even. "Why are you sleeping out here? It's just temporary," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Automatic. Apologetic. The same reflexive, minimizing I'd been doing for 5 months. Marcus set his bag down. He stepped fully into the room and sat down on the cot next to me. And he put his arm around my shoulders. And he said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I don't know exactly what happened after Marcus came back inside, because I wasn't in the room for most of it. But Renee told me later. She's told me pieces of it over the past year, filling in the parts she felt I needed to understand. Derek was in the living room when Marcus walked in from the garage. Derek had been watching something on his laptop and had barely acknowledged Marcus's arrival beyond a nod and a hey. "Man, when'd you get back?" Marcus pulled up a chair. He sat across from Derek. He didn't raise his voice. Marcus has never been someone who raises his voice. He said, "I need you to explain to me why my father has been sleeping in your storage room." Derek leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been seriously challenged in his own home. "Your father is a guest here." Marcus. He needed a place to land. We gave him one. The storage room is fine. It's got a cot. It's got a fan. It's got everything he needs. He's 68 years old. Marcus said, "He has a bad knee. It's been over 90 degrees out there on summer days. He's been eating less because he doesn't feel comfortable coming into the kitchen." Derek shrugged. Walter's always been dramatic. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Renee said the quiet was the part that scared her. "I'm going to say this once." Marcus said, "My father is not a burden. He is not a stray. He is not a tenant you can warehouse in a storage room. He is a man who worked for 31 years, who raised his family right, who never asked anyone for anything, and he deserves dignity. This is my house." Derek said, "Your house," Marcus said, nodding slowly. "Right. So here's what's going to happen in your house. My father is moving back into the guest room today. His $500 monthly payment stopped today. And you are going to apologize to him, a real apology. Not a performance, or I'm going to have a very long conversation with Renee about what kind of marriage she's actually living in." Derek stared at him. "I'm not joking," Marcus said. "And I'm not finished." What Marcus did next was something I hadn't known about until Renee told me months later. He had, during the weeks before flying home, managed to catch up on some emails and messages including a few from Renee that she'd sent during low moments and then tried to walk back. Messages that described what was happening at home in enough detail for Marcus to have made some preparations before he landed. He had already contacted an attorney who handled elder financial abuse cases. He had documentation of the informal rent arrangement Derek had imposed, screenshots of bank transfers. A message where Derek had texted me the amount owed. He had a record of the conditions in the storage room, because I had, without fully realizing it, sent Marcus a few photos of my temporary setup in early June, framing them as me being resourceful. But the images told their own story. Marcus laid all of this on the table. Not literally, he didn't need to. He simply told Derek what existed and who had seen it and what it could be characterized as under Ohio state law. Derek's confident lean disappeared. This doesn't have to go anywhere. Marcus said quietly. That depends entirely on you. Derek apologized to me that evening. He sat across from me in the kitchen, the main kitchen. The good kitchen with the pendant lights, and he said words that I could tell cost him something. I don't know if they were fully genuine. I don't think a man like Derek is built for full genuineness. But he said them. He looked at me when he said them. And when he finished, he didn't add a qualifier or a condition. I nodded. I said, I appreciate that. That was enough. I didn't need more from him. I moved back into the guest room that night. Marcus helped me carry my things. It took 3 trips, not because I had a lot, but because Marcus kept stopping to look at something and getting that look on his face again. The controlled devastation. And then composing himself and picking up the next box. My knee stopped aching as much when I had a real bed again. I stayed in Renee and Derek's house for another 6 weeks after that. Things were different. Derek was quieter. Not kind, exactly. Derek isn't built for easy kindness, but quieter. He stopped making comments at dinner. He stopped announcing my presence to his friends. He nodded at me in hallways instead of looking through me. Renee and I talked more during those 6 weeks than we had in years. Long talks in the kitchen after Derek went to bed. The kind we used to have when she was in high school and staying up too late. And I'd make hot chocolate and we'd sit at the table and she'd tell me things she didn't tell anyone else. She cried one night. Not about Derek or not only about him. About her mother. About how much she missed her and how she'd been trying so hard to build something that looked like the life her mother had built. And how some days she wasn't sure if she was building it or performing it. I told her Carol used to say that the difference between building and performing was who you were trying to impress. If the answer was yourself, you were building. Renee laughed and wiped her eyes and said that sounded like something her mother would say. It did, because Carol said it to me once. In 1997, during one of the hard years, when I wasn't sure I was doing anything right. I'd been carrying it ever since. In November, with Marcus's help, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a senior community in Westerville, a clean, quiet place with a small porch and a community garden plot. I put my name on the waiting list for, it cost me $640 a month. Utilities included. I had enough in savings and pension to be comfortable. More than comfortable, I had room to breathe. Marcus flew out and spent a week helping me set it up. He built a bookshelf for the living room. He helped me hang the framed photos, Carol. The kids. The Maplewood house in summer. He cooked dinner 3 nights in a row, and we sat at my new kitchen table and talked for hours. On the last night before he flew back to Portland, he said, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. Dad, you were working. I said, you can't be everywhere. I should have checked in more. I should have. Marcus. I put my hand on the table between us. You came. That's what matters. You came and you saw what was happening and you handled it, without making me feel small in the process. That's more than most people do. He looked at his coffee cup. I could see him working through something the way he's done since he was a boy, processing quietly, methodically, making sure he understood before he responded. He called you a stray. Marcus said finally. He did. To his friends. Out loud. Yes. I keep coming back to that. He shook his head slowly. You spent 31 years working. You raised 2 kids. You loved Mom for 40 years. You've never owed anyone an apology for existing. And he called you a stray. I let the words sit there between us for a moment. Stray. It had stung the first time. This word that reduced a whole human life to something inconvenient and unwanted. But sitting here now at my own table, in my own home, with my son across from me, it didn't have the same weight. Words only stay heavy when they land in a place that believes them. I had stopped believing this one. Derek is a man who needs to feel large. I said, by making other people feel small. That's not a flaw in me. That's a wound in him. I spent too many months making it my problem. I don't intend to do that anymore. Marcus looked up. He studied me for a moment. Mom would be proud of you, he said. I didn't trust my voice enough to respond. I just nodded. That was 11 months ago. Renee and Derek are still married. She calls me every Sunday. We talk about her week and mine and the garden plot I finally got in March. I've got tomatoes and green beans and a row of marigolds along the fence that Carol would have loved. We talk about her mother. We talk about Marcus, who is engaged now to a woman named Deirdre, who I've met twice and liked very much both times. Derek doesn't come up much. When he does, Renee speaks about him in a tone that's careful in a way I recognize. She's working something out. I don't push. I water my tomatoes in the morning. I have coffee on the porch when the weather allows. I go to a Wednesday evening card game with 3 other men from the building. Hank, who used to drive long-haul trucks, Preston, a retired school teacher, and Gus, who built custom furniture for 40 years and has hands that look like they've known real work. We play for pennies and argue about football and tell the same stories about our younger years and laugh like the stories are new every time. I'm not living the life I thought I'd have at 68. Carol was supposed to be here. We were supposed to grow old in Maplewood, complaining about property taxes and tending the garden and taking slow walks in the evenings the way we did when the kids were grown and the house finally felt quiet in the good way. That's not the life I have, but what I have is mine. A porch. A garden. A son who flew home early because something told him to. A daughter who is finding her way. Tomatoes that aren't ready yet but will be soon. And a cot in a storage room that taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way, that dignity doesn't live in where you sleep or what someone else calls you. It lives in whether, at the end of the day, you still know who you are. I know who I am. My name is Walter Greer. I am 68 years old. I worked for 31 years and loved one woman and raised 2 children who turned out fine. Nobody gets to take that from me. Not even a man who needed me to be small to feel large himself.